And then last but not least, we have something that's incredibly interesting that you have read a little bit about, the ethics of dissent. So in 1970, Hirschman wrote Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. And this outlined a typology of responses to ethical dissatisfaction in the workplace. And he argued that if you are faced with an ethical problem, you have three options about what to do with it. You can either exit, leave, or quit your organization. Voice, you can express your dissatisfaction. Or loyalty, you can faithfully wait for conditions to improve and hope that the ethical dilemma or situation kind of resolves itself. And then Farrell in 1983 added a fourth element to Hirschman's work called neglect. Kind of just benign, neglect the problem, and kind of neglected into submission. So whistleblowing kind of typifies this voice idea, expressing your dissatisfaction. However, whistleblowing, which exposes secretive information and activity that is deemed illegal or unethical, internally or externally, can be extremely hard for individuals to do. One of the critiques of Hirschman is that exit, voice, and loyalty all seem to be extremely privileged responses to an ethical dilemma. So if you decide to whistleblow, although public administration and public organizations have a lot of whistleblower protections in place, as our current situation demonstrates, whistleblowers can face a lot of blowback against their particular information. They can face legal consequences, criminal indictments, they can face social stigma, they can also face termination. So even if there are protections in place, if you are found out to be the whistleblower, there can be social stigma that eventually ices you out of your job, making you less able to perform your duties. So a lot of people are very afraid to whistleblow because we have seen whistleblowers face these blowbacks a lot of times on the international or on the national stage and face a lot of dire consequences for them. So people tend to be afraid to whistleblow, and people have argued that it is a privilege to whistleblow when faced with an ethical dilemma. This has resulted in what Rosemary O'Leary calls guerrilla government. So guerrilla government is when you technically stay, but you are not loyal. So you are working against the wishes, either implicit or explicitly communicated by your superior. And you're working against them in a way that you believe is ethically sound. This is often a result of a tension between bureaucracy and democracy. So in guerrilla government, this usually occurs when internal opportunities for voicing one's dissent are limited or declined. So when you feel like you cannot be a whistleblower. When the perceived cost of voicing one's opposition is greater than the perceived cost of guerrilla government activities. When the issues involved are personalized or the subject of deeply held values. When quitting one's job or leaving one's agency is seen as having a destructive rather than good effect on the policies of concern. So guerrilla government can be seen as rather a heroic thing, but it also can be seen as an extremely negative thing. So one of the examples that I always like to use of guerrilla government is the clerk in Kentucky who refused to issue gay marriage certificates after the Supreme Court ruled that gay marriage was legal. That was an example of guerrilla government. She was working against the explicitly communicated wishes of her superiors that she needed to grant marriage certificates to same-sex couples. So that is an example of guerrilla government. So it can be a good thing, but it also can be an extremely negative thing. And Rosemary O'Leary outlined several harsh realities about guerrilla government within public administration. She stated that guerrilla government is here to stay. We will always have it. Guerrillas can do it to you in ways you'll never know, i.e., guerrillas can always get around formal ethics accountability and codes of ethics. All guerrilla activity is not created equal. With the example of the Kentucky clerk, some guerrilla activity can be extremely beneficial, some cannot. Harsh reality number 4, most public organizations are inadequately equipped to deal effectively with guerrilla government. Harsh reality 5, the tensions inherent in guerrilla government will never be resolved. This is that idea that there will always be a tension between democratic government and this idea of being accountable to the public ethically and to your own personal ethics, and then being accountable to the ethics of the bureaucracy that you are involved in. There will always be those tensions. And we can never, as a society, get rid of those tensions, so guerrilla government will always exist. However, O'Leary argues that a way to deal with these ethical tensions is to create an organization culture that accepts, welcomes, and encourages candid dialogue and debate. So you want to cultivate a questioning attitude by encouraging staff to challenge the assumptions and actions of an organization, to listen when people voice ideas that are separate from the prevailing attitude, avoid groupthink, to understand the formal and informal organization within your particular public administration department, to separate the people from the problem. So you know that you might have a problem where people disagree about what is the ethical solution, and therefore you need to focus on how to solve that problem and not get into people's personal personalities and personal ethics, although sometimes that's kind of impossible. Then you also need to create multiple channels for dissent. So if they feel like they're getting stonewalled at one level, people feel like they have multiple outlets to express why they think something might be ethically wrong. But you also want to create dissent boundaries and know when to stop kind of giving people a platform, and the road has to stop somewhere. Like, you can't just allow someone to completely block everything. You need to create boundaries. So the idea is that there needs to be acknowledgement that different public servants will be compelled by different ethical obligations. For whistleblowing, it's kind of deontology in that you must do it because it's right. But the definition of a whistleblower is often due to the consequences that their declaration causes. So if they blow the whistle and it ends up with the greatest good for the greatest number, they're lauded. But if they whistle blow and still bad things happen, then they generally are not celebrated. And then guerrilla governance is about creating spaces for those motivated by different moral theories to be able to voice their opinions. So that was a lot. That was an hour of different political thoughts and beliefs, or ethical thoughts and beliefs. So what's the point? Why did we spend all that time listening and talking about that? You may ask, okay, so did we do it to become a more ethical person? Will learning about these ideas make me more ethical? According to a series of empirical studies by Eric Schwitzgebel at the University of California, Riverside, mostly in collaboration with the philosopher Joshua Rust of Stetson University, the answer is no. Studying ethics does not make you a more ethical person. He published a series of really funny essays that I highly recommend, and he calls it cheeseburger ethics. So they did a study where they looked at measures such as voting, calling your mom, vegetarianism, donating to charity, littering, disruptive behavior during philosophy presentations, responding to student emails, attending conferences without paying registration fees, organ donation and blood donation, theft of library books, overall moral evaluation by one's departmental peers based on personal impressions, honesty in responding to survey questions, and joining the Nazi Party in 1930s Germany. That last one is a specific diss on a particular philosopher called Martin Heidegger, who in the 1930s was a philosophy professor in Germany, and he wrote about ethics. He also was dating one of his students who was Jewish, called Hannah Arendt, who I have a big philosophical crush on, and you will probably hear about her later this quarter. She wrote a wonderful book called The Origins of Totalitarianism. I highly recommend you check it out. And he joined the Nazi Party in order to retain his teaching position, even though he was dating a Jewish woman at the time. And she left the country to avoid the Nazis, and he stayed and remained in the party. So that is a specific dig at him. Anyway, long story short. So these surveys found that ethicists do not appear to behave better. They have found that ethicists as a whole ethicists have never once behaved better than the comparison group of other professors by any of those measures. But neither overall do they seem to behave worse. So that's good. And there are some mixed results. For the most part, ethicists behave no differently from professors of any other sort. In a survey of professors from 5 US states, they found that 60% of ethicist respondents rated regularly eating the meat of mammals, such as beef or pork, somewhere on the morally bad side of a 9-point scale, ranging from very morally bad to very morally good. By contrast, only 19% of non-philosophy professors rated it as bad. That's a pretty big difference of opinion. However, non-ethicist philosophers were intermediate at about 45%. But when asked later in the survey whether they had eaten the meat of a mammal at their last evening meal, they found no statistically significant difference in the group's responses. So even though 60% of ethicists said that eating meat was morally bad, there was no difference in response about whether or not they had eaten meat. And about 38% of professors from all groups reported having done so, including 37% of ethicists. Similar for charitable donations. So basically, ethicists are talking the talk, but not walking the walk. So this brought up the idea for our researchers that, sorry, my notes have gotten all mixed up. Okay, there we go. They argued that we aspire to be as morally good as our peers. So if others cheat and get away with it, we want to be able to do the same. We don't want to suffer for goodness while others laughingly gather the benefits of vice. If the morally good life is uncomfortable or unpleasant, and if it involves repeated painful sacrifices that are not compensated in some way, sacrifices that other people are not making, then we don't want to do it. And studying ethics doesn't make us want to do it more. Also, empirical research on moral licensing suggests that people who act well on one occasion use that as an excuse to act less well on a subsequent one. I kind of compare it to dieting, where they're like, oh, I had a salad for lunch, so I can go ham on that chocolate cake at dinner. The idea is that if you do one good thing, you tend to kind of do more bad stuff because you justify it by having done that one good thing. So a great philosopher was or is should be able to be a role model, a breathing example of a life well lived. Socrates taught as much by drinking the hemlock as by any of his dialogues. Confucius by his personal correctness, Siddhartha by his renunciation of wealth, Jesus by washing his disciples' feet. Socrates did not say, ethically, the right thing for me to do would be to drink this hemlock, but I'm going to run away instead. So consider the doctrine, treat everyone as moral equals who are worthy of respect. Kant. What counts as adhering to this value, and what constitutes a violation of it? Only when we understand how this value plays out across examples do we really understand them. So living our values or trying to live them forces concrete confrontation with these examples, these ideas of how to be good. So a full-bodied understanding of ethics requires you to do some living and some trial and error to kind of figure out where your moral principles stand in your life. And just studying ethics and learning what other people have said about ethics isn't necessarily going to make you in your lived life be more ethical. However, the reason that I did this whole lecture, moral philosophy kind of grounds all of public administration's ethical theories and kind of grounds most of our moral theories, even if we aren't explicitly going, oh, well, the deontological answer would be. the point is that these have sort of infiltrated our background assumptions in a way where we are not consciously drawing on them, but they have formed the backbone of a lot of what we personally would consider an ethical choice. And public administration's theories of accountability, of ethics codes, of design science, which depends on moral philosophy, and the ethics of dissent are all based on these moral philosophy branches. Also, no one of these theories exists in isolation. No one theory, forgot to turn my phone off, exists in isolation. No one theory solves all dilemmas. Each of these has pros and cons to them. And depending on your own personal moral philosophy and foundation, there are going to be different pros and cons, and one theory may speak to you more than others. So that can also be a personal choice. But no one theory can solve every single ethical dilemma that you're going to come across. Also, many of these theories can be implemented at the same time. That's one of the benefits of design science, is that you look on the problem and kind of sort through your moral, ethical Rolodex. You young people probably don't know what a Rolodex is. Back in the day, you'd have a little file thing with everyone's number, and you'd sort through it and then pull out the right number. So you sort through all your theories, and then you'd pull out the right one. So many of these different theories can be implemented at the same time. Basically, moral philosophy and these theories are tools to encourage critical and self-reflective thinking, so that when you make a decision, when confronted with something that you think might be an ethical gray area or an ethical quandary, you can justify why you did what you did. And you'd be okay with it being on the cover of the New York Times the next day. So I'm going to end it here. I will post the separate sheet with the works cited, because they somehow did not end up on this PowerPoint. And I will also figure out how to close caption this. I hope this was helpful. If you need anything explained in more detail, I will be very happy to explain it when I come back. And I hope this inspired you to look up some more ethical things and to watch The Good Place, because it does a really good job of explaining moral philosophy. All right, thank you so much. Bye.